Welcome to the We Are All Dying podcast. My name is Jannah, and my hope is that through these conversations, we become more comfortable, competent, and confident talking about death. On today's show, we have my good friend, Maryam De Groef. Maryam is a mother who had the honor of mothering 2 children earthside, while also having 2 children waiting for her in Jannah, which is heaven for our Muslim friends and family. Maryam is a coach. She helps with regulating people's nervous systems after losses or traumas and offers so many amazing opportunities both online and in person. Maryam, welcome to the We Are All Dying podcast. I am so grateful to have you with us today.
I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
I can't remember when we first connected, but I do believe it was around the topic of death, and it might have been this podcast that sort of united us. But when I think about you now, I just think of this incredible woman who I admire so much and just has so much love and wisdom. And I feel really fortunate to be able to share you with others.
Well, we haven't even started and you're making me cry. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm prepared to get emotional today, because of what we're talking about, but also just because of, the breadth of how much I really care about you already. And we've only just met, but I think when you find your people, you just have that connection right away. So, why don't we get into some of the things that we've talked about in the past and that I think that you can help others navigate should they have some of these experiences. The first thing that you had shared with me was the death of your daughter at 9 years old. And that's, for any parent, our worst nightmare. And I know that you've been really selective around the language you've used. And so I kind of want to hand it to you to kind of share that experience, maybe just the context of it first for people to kind of understand how this happened. And then we can kind of unpack all the many ways that this has really made you such a voice, an advocate for so many different things.
Oh, thank you. I have to correct you, 9 3/4.
Yeah.
She'd be really annoyed if if you didn't mention the
Sorry.
3/4. She was obsessed with Harry Potter, so I just think it's so fitting that she left at that age too. It's a little bit of an ode to the life that she lived. So we are new immigrants to, oh no, can't say new anymore. Next week it will be 5 years. So we moved to Canada at the end of 2019. From Belgium. My husband's Belgium. Both my children were born in Belgium. And I was living there with my family for the 8 years prior to immigrating. And we moved to Montreal, and we didn't last long in Montreal. We Quexited quite quickly. My husband found a job in Ontario, so we moved end of January 2020, and launched right into COVID. So we were in a family of 4 new immigrants, managed to rent a tiny little basement in Mississauga. And for the most part, it was good. We had a really amazing time in hindsight. Obviously, at the time, it was like, 4 people all in one roof, 2 wildlings. And then we bought our house in London, Ontario, end of 2022. And we moved in end of February 23. And so that's just a little bit of a backstory to where we were and how we got here. Also includes a lot of loss and changes along the way, which kind of contribute to what you bring to the table when you're talking to others. So Zeynah was an allergy child. She developed allergies around the age of 18 months after a severe reaction to a vaccine. Again, totally different topic, but I do have to mention it because it's part of our story. And so from that day onwards, she had a lot of health conditions, lots of allergies, lots of trial and error with her health. And so we'd gotten to a place where she was pretty good. She was doing really good. And I know in hindsight, because she's not here anymore, it sounds a little bit odd to say that her health was better in Canada, which is why we moved here. But she was, like, the air quality here is amazing. She was off a lot of her inhalers. She was an asthma child as well. And so moving to Canada felt like the right move for our family at the time. It still does sometimes. Um, and so she had a lot of allergies. She was allergic to many things, both environmental contact and food. And so we moved, as I said, we moved end of February, and they were home for about 2 weeks. It was March break, and I was kind of figuring out whether I wanted the girls to go into public schooling or alternative schooling. And we'd settled on, um, again, such an ode to her. We settled on an amazing school that we found called the School of Magic. And it's like an outdoor school. It combines a lot of holistic education, so Montessori, Waldorf, outdoor ed, like forest schooling. So we signed them up to that. They were so excited to go. And on Monday, the 13th of March, it was their first day of school. And so they went off to school and they had an amazing day. I picked my daughter up, but both of them, I picked them up from school. Zeynah was in a tree and we had like a little bit of a banter, and she jumped out of the tree and she came and she hugged me and she told me that she had the best day of her life. And so I was like, oh my God, like she had the best day of her life. Little did I know that that would be also the last day of her life. Um, so we came home and as you know, as any parent knows, the snacks, what can I have to eat? Can I have something to eat? What's to eat? And so the girls both had a snack, and then um, my little one, Ziva, asked if she could have some pine nuts. We'd recently bought some from Costco. They're so bloody expensive, so they're not a staple in our house at all. Um, and I gave her some, and then Zeynah asked me, "Can I have some too?" And I was like, "Okay." She'd had them before, and a few days prior, she said, "I'm not having those." So I was like, "Okay," I respected that. So I asked her once, twice, three times, "Are you sure you want to have them?" And she said yes. And so she ate two, maybe three, not more than three little pine nuts. Um, and then she ended up going into an anaphylactic shock, maybe 25 minutes later. We had never used an EpiPen before, even though we'd been prescribed one since an early age. And we'd always been prepared to use one. Unfortunately for us, we didn't know that it would be the first and the last time. And it all happened really in a really crazy way, not the usual signs of anaphylaxis that you're taught will happen. And even prior to me calling 911, Zeynah, the last thing she actually said to me, and I think the last words she actually ever spoke were, "Don't call the ambulance, Mama, I promise I'm fine." And I said to her, "You know what, it's okay if they come and you're fine, they'll come and they'll go. And if you're not, we'll figure it out." And as I was on the phone to 911, things took a turn for the worst, and we ended up having to give her an EpiPen. And she went into a cardiac arrest immediately in front of us on our living room floor, in our new home. And my husband Nils, he had to start CPR. We are really fortunate that we live right around the corner from a fire station. So they were here within like 3 minutes. I was on the phone with 911 for a total of 6 minutes. And by the time I hung up, the police, the fire, and the EMT were all here. So it was a really quick response. We, I have like the fire staff were amazing. We're still in contact with them. They're great guys. They stop by from time to time, and we stop by and see them. Paramedics were also amazing. Have a little bit of an issue with the way we were handled with the police. We were treated as if we were criminals, so we were escorted off the premises. We were not allowed to come back in. We were bundled into the back of a police car, which I don't know if you've ever been in one. This is my first time in one. Hopefully it's the last. It's really claustrophobic in there, especially when you're going through this like trauma already. And so that wasn't great, but everyone who arrived at the scene were amazing. The paramedic was amazing. Zeynah's lungs were so badly seized that it took them a long time to get her heart back, but they did get her back. And she was rushed to London Victoria Hospital, where she spent a week. So from the Monday to the Thursday, they spent a long time trying to stabilize her. She was on life support. Again, had an amazing team. Yeah, the nurses, the respiratory therapists, her doctor, all of the staff were amazing. They did everything that they could to figure out what was happening to her, but they also kept us realistically optimistic, I guess is the word I would use. But we knew, we saw the extent of the anaphylaxis and the cardiac arrest, and I think deep down you know when someone's taken their last breath, and I'm grateful that it was in the arms of her papa, the same arms that held her when she first came into this world were the same arms that she left in. Oh, which is so beautiful. I think I couldn't have asked for it to be in a better place. She was in a place that she called home. She was around people that loved her and did everything to help her. And I think for me as well, witnessing it was probably enough to give me closure, whereas if it had happened at school or in someone else's care, it would always probably be, could I have done something to save her? So anyway, she was in pediatric critical care from the Monday to the Thursday, and then she was taken to have a nuclear brain scan, which showed that there was no brain activity. So that was her official time of death, although for me it was the Monday. And there was some hope of a miracle, and we prayed that she would come back to us the way that she left, because I don't think she would have liked to come back any other way either. And then we were asked if we would consider organ donation, and that was a huge shock to us because Nils and I have always been organ donors wherever we've lived. We've lived in a lot of different countries, and we've also always made sure that we've signed up to whichever program or scheme is available in the country that we lived in. And so when we were asked, it was an immediate 100,000% yes. She was a giver and a helper and a little mama duck, always kind of wanting to know if she could do anything for you, if she could get you anything. So I thought it was really fitting for her to become an organ donor. That in and of itself was a miracle, because less than 1% of people who die in hospital get to donate their organs. So grateful that she got to the hospital and she didn't die at home. It's also one of the reasons why I never call Zeynah's death a tragedy, because I can't in good conscience call her death a tragedy when she saved so many people's lives. And as we know, in order for one thing to happen, the other has to happen too. Yeah, so from the Thursday to the Sunday, we were in talks with Trillium Gift of Life. Our coordinator was amazing. She went above and beyond her responsibilities too. She wasn't supposed to work on the Sunday when Zeynah went down to the operating theatre, but she came in on her day off, and Zeynah's doctor also came in on his day off to say goodbye to us and say goodbye to her. And it was a really nice send off, I guess is the right word. So she ended up saving the lives of 5 people with her heart, liver, both her kidneys, and her pancreas. And she gave the gift of sight to 4 people with the gift with her eyes, which is amazing. Again, she was such a busy bee and wanted to be everywhere, and now like there's little parts of her all over. And again, like our faith has played a really big role in how we've processed this death, and how we've kind of come to terms with certain things. And for me, there were a lot of divine signs along the way that showed me that Zeynah was exactly where she was meant to be when she was meant to be there. Um, and I think one of the biggest ones were her heart was actually offered to an older patient. And I wasn't aware that pediatric organs could go into adults, but they can. And so it was offered to an older patient, 27-year-old. And I just kept saying to Nils, something doesn't feel right. And he kind of laughed and was like, none of this feels right. And I was like, no, but this specifically. And so he was like, I don't know, maybe it is and maybe it is, I don't know. And I was like, yeah, but something doesn't feel right. And so then Megan came back to us and said that the heart was rejected from this patient because one of Zeynah's heart valves was too short. I said heart valves and there's a heart behind me. Was too short, and so they had to then look for a new patient. And Zeynah also had a rare blood type, so it made it harder to find a recipient. And so the plan was that they would look in province, and if they didn't find anyone in the province, they'd look Canada wide, and then if not, they'd offer it to the States. And again, I was like, I don't want it to go to the States. I wanted to stay here. Um, and then on the Friday, Megan came back to us and told us that they'd found someone for the heart, and it was a 10-year-old girl. And it just felt so divine because Zeynah would have been 10 in May of last year, and her heart was going to a 10-year-old. And to me, it just feels like part of Zeynah gets to live on in a consecutive order. Like she gets to be 11 and 12 and 13. Um, and so to me, again, in order for one thing to happen, the other had to happen. And Zeynah had a really kind, big, generous heart. And now it's in another little girl. And I hope that that girl also takes on these like qualities that our girl did. And I'm sure that she will. Um, and so, yeah, so I think with faith and the loss of anyone, but particularly a child, has been kind of my rock and foundation to help me get through this. Um, and so yeah, so then she went down for her organ donation, and we buried her, not in London because of this, I don't know, it's so new, it's not really home yet. So she's up in Kleinberg, close to where my brother lives. So there's a lot of family who can visit her gravesite there. But again, it's her final resting place. It's not significant to like the be all and end all of her story. She's everywhere. She's here and there and everywhere.
Wow. I mean, I'm struck by, it's so sad, but we're sitting here and we're smiling, and it's such a beautiful story. Like, this is such a beautiful story. Um, Even just to imagine, like, she's out there moving around right now. She's
Yep.
seeing, she's feeling, she's
Yep.
whatever pancreases do.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're important.
Yeah.
But that's like, what an incredible way to keep her in the world in some way. Especially like given just what a giver she was and a helper.
Yeah.
It really is true to her story, right?
Yeah. I
Yeah.
feel like so I always called her my miracle baby. I had her after I had cancer, and we had been told that it might be difficult to conceive. And so Nils and I, once we had that all clear and we were allowed to try, we had told ourselves that we wouldn't put pressure on ourselves. And if it was meant to be, it would be. And if it wasn't, then we'd figure out a different way to become parents. And she came so quickly. I was shocked. We were all shocked. Nils, the consultant that we had, was so shocked, that I came back in the following month and I was like, I'm pregnant. And so I always called her my miracle baby. There's so many synchronicities with her birth and her death. She took a really long time to come into this world. Um, and then she also took a really long time coming out. And so I laugh and I'm like, of course she took a long time going out because she took a long time coming in. And so my mum used to call her her miracle baby too. And I just find it's really fitting that she then became a miracle to other people's families. And, they prayed for somebody to come along that would be right for them. And here was my child with this rare blood type, um, who then gave life to people who would have died had she not. Um, so yeah, I think her whole life was just um, full of like magic and miracles. And now for me as well, I tried to live my life the way that she did. She was a great teacher in this like love for life. Every day she'd wake up and be like, "What adventures are we going on today, Mama?" And I'm like, "School." The supermarket. I don't know. What adventures do you want to go on? And so, she wanted to cram everything in. And now in hindsight, when I look back, I'm like, okay, she only had a decade and she had to fit it all in. And so everything and every day of her life was like that. Can we do this? Can we do it now? If we can't do it now, can you promise that we'll do it another time? And so now I try to live um, life in ways that she would, and I tried to make an adventure of the smallest of things. Um, yeah,
Yeah. I mean, i- she did a lot in her 9 and 3/4 of years.
yeah,
But also you went through a lot. Like that's a lot of moving, a lot of changing, like
yeah,
all those things are big, significant life events.
yeah.
How have you navigated this? What's your story through this been?
So I feel like my life along the way has kind of little by little been preparing me for this. And not to say that I was being prepared to lose a child. I just feel like I was being prepared to have and build resilience. And so I'm a women's health coach, and more recently, probably the year or two prior to Zeynah's death, I focused a lot on nervous system regulation. And so what that looked like was teaching myself and other women um, how to ground themselves, how to balance those hormones, how to regulate that nervous system. And so it would be tools like breath work, meditation, grounding, cold water exposure, emotional, like EFT, emotional freedom technique, Reiki, mindfulness. And I think all of those tools that I'd been using up to this point really allowed me to be in the present moment when Zeynah went into anaphylaxis, and it wasn't this huge panic. And I mean, there is this internal panic because your child is losing life in front of you, and there's nothing that can prepare you to witness that. But at the same time, you can use your breath, which you use every day to keep yourself alive, to help you not go off into a panic and go off into like go reel into like and spiral into like something that's not good for you. And so in the hospital, we were with her 24/7, but I always took time to go away, one to pray and to do these um exercises, as you if you want to call them that. Again, like we have our breath with us all the time, so it's not really an exercise, it's just using it in a more controlled way to help you regulate yourself so that you can be in the present moment. Um, and I think speaking to a lot of people who I've met along the way, because once you're thrown into um, a situation, you then find other people who have been in that situation. And so having met other mums who've lost children either similarly to Zeynah through anaphylaxis or in other ways, It's been interesting to hear their stories and how they kind of dealt with that death through the hospital. And a lot of them said we weren't able to make that decision to donate their organs because it was just like, what's happening? Um, and I think, you know, those tools are an amazing way to support you, but they can also really help when you're in crisis. And not a lot of people have those. And so my story has been that I've been able to get through this with my faith and with the tools that I teach other women and teach myself. And sometimes I have to eat a little bit of humble pie and be like, actually, I didn't do that today. That's why I'm feeling all these things. Um, and so it's been really interesting with death and loss because you lose community because people are uncomfortable to be around you, but you also gain community. And that's all within also moving from the community that we had to a new community. Said the word community 10 times. Um, so I think for me, it's been surrounding myself with people who understand or who can ground me when I'm in this spiral. It's been therapy. So we started therapy really soon after Zeynah died, and so did Ziva, my little one, because you can't talk yourself out of trauma. You can't pray yourself out of trauma, and you often can't talk yourself out of it either. So that's been really helpful to have the tools from our therapist to add in our, like, I don't know, toolkit. Um, I think I can't also separate my story from what's happening in the world. And so oftentimes I feel a lot more grief than I probably would had this incident happened maybe 2 years ago, 5 years ago. And so what I see with like my family and like the privileges that we have because of the place we were born in or the place that we live in versus other people and other children who are born in different parts of the world. And so I hold a lot of grief in that sense as well. And so I just am really intentional about my day. I start with my prayers. I'm Muslim, so I started with my Fajr prayer, and then I have an amazing friend, Francesca, who runs Diaries of a Relaxed Woman. So I'm just giving her a plug. And she does a journaling program in the morning. It's half an hour, and so I just journaling and emptying the mind from like any clutter. Also writing things into existence. So you speak things and words are powerful and meaningful, and so really like aligning myself with this life that I want to have and want to have a joyful life. I want to laugh and have fun, and I know that there'll always 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 be a part of me that is perpetually sad, and grief and joy coexist. And I think that learning to walk with them together side by side and knowing that sometimes one will be stronger than the other is okay. And so just having those tools, so prayers, journaling, meditation, cold plunging, grounding, breath work, and community, really like surrounding myself with people who get it, and not worrying about those who can't show up the way that I would like them to show up for me, because not a lot of people can show up when um, death or loss occurs.
Hmm. Yeah, you spoke a lot about community and the value that people who've gone through something similar can understand and how they can hold space differently. Um, it's a very unique experience, and you don't know until it's happened to you. What are some things that people who don't get it have said that you can tell they're trying to be helpful, but they're not, or maybe they've let you down, like you expected certain things of them because they were your friends for a long time or even family, that the community that understands has been able to give you.
I think what was really eye-opening for me was that the people I thought would be there weren't there. Like friends that I've known for years and years and years found it hard to pick up the phone and call. Um, Other friends who you've spent a lot of time with stop inviting you to things because they think it might be hard. Especially like a birthday party for their 10-year-old, or things that they think that you might not want to be invited to. And so rather than leaving the ball in your court and asking, would you want to come, they make that assumption for you. Um, um, I think for me, it's been really eye-opening that friends and strangers have been there more than certain family members, especially for Ziva. That's been really interesting too. And so, uh, so I think my advice for someone who knows someone who's lost someone, um, whether that's a child, a spouse, a parent, a friend, is to not um, don't assume what the other person wants. Always ask and leave it to them, and just check in. I have like my best friend, she's amazing. She lives in another country, so we have a time difference, but she'll always say, I know it's crap, but thinking of you. Or she'll just be like, here if you need me. Do you want X? Would you like a meal? um, do you want me to Uber you something? And so whether I respond or not, she'll still continue to do that. And I think that's really beautiful, because I think oftentimes when that person doesn't reciprocate, then it's seen as like they don't need it or they're okay. And I think when you see people laughing and joking outside or on social media, that's just a snippet of their day or the hour or that week. Um, and as I said, that grief, like, it ebbs and flows. And so one minute you can be laughing and then the next minute you're crying. And so seeing them laughing and thinking, oh, they're okay because they're laughing, like, don't make that assumption either. I think for me, it's been really nice to um, connect with other parents who've lost children, because they know, especially other parents who've had two children and then lost one, and now they only have an only child, because that whole dynamic is just, it's just mind blowing to kind of get your head around. um, you to get your head around, I had two children and now I only have one. And it's really hard for that child to go from like having a sibling to being an only child. And the struggles that come with that are so hard. And I think they're so unique to that kind of a family. And so I found resources in um, organizations like Lumara. We just went on a family grief camp, and we went from Thursday to Sunday, and we were with people who have experienced loss, who just get it and know that even when you're laughing, that you're still really sad. Even though you have all this laughter and joy, your heart's still broken. Um, Seeing your only child laughing, and but knowing that they have to go back home and they're going to be alone, has been really phenomenal. And I think the way that um, certain organizations speak to children. We were talking about it before, that humanizing grief and giving it a name. And so in Camp Carey, it was Hank, and so asking, "How's your Hank?" and just kind of like making a little joke of it, and being able to say, "Well, Hank's hanking," and laughing it off. And I think that terminology and giving it to children um, is is big too, and having other people being able to say, I don't really know how to talk to X about what they're feeling, and then being like, well, just talk to them like you would anyone. Like, how are you feeling? How are you? It's really crappy, but did you have a laugh today? What are you grateful for? And I think I've just kind of gone away from the question, but I think just really being like, not expecting anything from that person, and not assuming that they do or don't need something. I think that's been the biggest takeaway.
Um, how has faith played a role in this for you? Have you noticed differences between the other parents that you've met, and how faith has given you something that maybe they don't experience? Is there even, pre Zaynah's death, how did you grow up thinking about death? How has death, as a Muslim woman, played a role in how you see life, death, and everything before and after?
Yeah. So My relationship with God has also ebbed and flowed. Like sometimes it's been my faith has been really strong, and other times it's been like, how can X happen if there's a God? Like, how can these natural disasters come and like wipe off entire communities, and like how is that okay? And so there's been this like ebb and flow of like my relationship with my faith and with God, and I think that that's normal. I lost my dad 21 years ago. Um, and I think even through that as well, like there's been a lot of like up and down with like faith. For Muslims, and for me, whatever I say is my own perspectives, not I'm not going to speak for like the entire Islamic community. But for me, we say, surely to Allah we belong and surely to him we return. And so to me, that means that everything comes from him and everything goes back to him. As a parent, I think we think that our children belong to us. It's taken me a minute to realize that actually, like, they're not our belongings, they're not our possessions, they come through us. They're a gift. I don't think anyone comes onto this earth without God's permission. And so everyone who's here has a reason to be here. And I feel like our entry day and our exit dates are fixed. Anything in between is what you kind of the choices that you make. Um, I mentioned earlier, there were so many like signs that happened along the way, and a lot of people would call them coincidences, and probably once upon a time I might have done too, but they were so specific to Zeynah that I couldn't call them coincidences, that came to show me that Zeynah was exactly where she was meant to be. And in turn that means we were exactly where we were meant to be. um when I think about Zeynah, I think this little girl who was born in Belgium ended up in London, Ontario, and then became an organ donor and saved so many people's lives. It's just like the things that had to happen in order for her to get here were just so unique to her. Um, I I I think with the media and everything that's happening in the world, you have probably heard the saying, the Islamic, the Quranic verse, Allah is sufficient for us and he is the best disposer of affairs. Um, I think it's been really important to kind of repeat that to myself as a mantra and know that anything that's happening to me is happening for me. Um, there are lots of things in the Quran and in the sayings of the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, that point to what happens to children when they die. And I've had a lot of friends who have had dreams of Zeynah in these specific scenarios. And so that kind of makes me happy and gives me more faith. Um, I feel like Zeynah, so children, when they die, they immediately go to Jannah, which is heaven or paradise after the forever home, um, because they are pure and sinless. And so I look back at everything that Zeynah did in her life, and of course she deserves to be there. And the promise of being reunited with a child, in the Quran, it also says that the children of Jannah will wait at the gates until God lets their parents enter. And so it's that promise of being reunited, and that person is going to be an intercessor for you. There are days where it's really hard and where I feel really sad that she isn't here with me physically, to hug and to hold and to kiss and hear her laugh and hear her silly stories. And um, that dimension has gone, but I feel like I'm getting to know her in a different dimension, and my relationship with her has just kind of shifted to a more spiritual one. And I see that in that whenever I am really sad and I feel like I can't continue on the way that it is, I will have a sign. And for me, like, those things are in the things that Zeynah loved, and they'll happen at the moment where I like so in the midst of despair. And for Zeynah, it was nature and birds and rainbows and things like that. And often you'll hear people who've lost someone say, "Oh, this thing always happens." And so for us, it's like a red cardinal. We have a red cardinal that comes and sits on our deck, or we have a bird feeder and it comes and sits on our bird feeder. And the summer that Zeynah died, whenever I sat on the deck and I would be talking about Zeynah, this red cardinal would come. And last summer my sister was here and I was telling her this story. I was like, I was telling everyone that every time I talk about Zeynah, this red, and as soon as I said red, this red cardinal came and it sat right next to my sister, and she was like, "What's happening?" And so I kind of laughed, and I'm silly about it, and I say, "Hi, Zeynah," and then it will just flutter away, fly away, and it's just like a little moment of reprieve. And I think that God sends you these like signs to help ease your pain. Um, and for me, my faith has really strengthened over the last year. I'm still not where I would hope to be, but it's a lot stronger than it was maybe 2 years ago. And I do see other families who've lost their children in really hard ways, and I can understand why their faith is shaken, or they've lost their faith, because it's really hard to understand why X would happen to them or to their children. Um, so I think it's a really deeply individual thing, but I'm so grateful that I have it, because I don't know what I would do without it.
Close to a year from when Zaina died, you had another experience that really changes someone's life. Are you comfortable sharing that?
Yeah. Um, I'm again synchronicities in life that happen. Like we're doing this podcast in October, which I'll talk about in a minute. But um, I was happy with the family that I had. I was content with my two wild girls. They were enough to equate to 10. My auntie used to tell me whenever she was around them, my eyeballs are tired just watching them. And so I always laughed that I had more than my hands, more than I could take on. And so then we lost Zaina, and it was really hard to, it has been really hard to see Ziva go through life alone. And then in January of this year, I unexpectedly found out that I was expecting, which was a huge shock because we weren't trying for another baby. I wasn't in the mindset that I would have a baby and an 8-year-old. Like it wasn't, it just, it was a curveball. And once I got over the shock, I was really excited for Ziva and for us. Um, it just felt like there was hope after such a hard time. And the term rainbow baby is used for children who come after a loss. And so here I was thinking this was our rainbow baby. And unfortunately, the rainbow baby didn't quite become a rainbow. We lost that baby around 9, 10 weeks in March of 2024. And I was like, how is this happening? And so March is a really hard month because Ziva's birthday is in March. So Ziva had turned 7 a week before Zaina died. And so I was already expecting a really hard March, celebrating one child and mourning the other. And then another little being came and then left in March. Um, so that was really hard to accept. And I was really angry with God. And I was like, why would you do this? Why would you do this to us? Um, and then I remembered something that Zaina and Ziva had actually both done. and it felt so. Prior to us moving to London, they came into our room with a notebook and pen in hand. That was Zeynah. She'd have a notebook and a pen and a reading book under her hand wherever she went. And so they came into our room and they were like, "We think you should have another baby." And we were like, "Yeah, I don't think that's happening." And they had a whole list of reasons why. Um, and so during this loss, I remembered that she had written this, and I kind of flipped my thinking. And to me, it felt like I gave Zaina a gift, and that this soul was meant to be for her. I don't know what's meant to be for Ziva. Haven't figured that out yet. But it's been really hard to have those like two child losses in the same month, and then Ziva's birthday in the same month is like a little bit of a head. mm, Um, so I'm kind of dreading that time of year that comes. But as I said, like I think life is so synchronous, and how you asked me to do this podcast, and it's been a while since you've done this podcast, and we're doing it in October. And October is Pale Month, which is pregnancy and infant loss month. So I get to talk about two children that I've lost in Pale Month. And it's really, it was my first miscarriage. It was an experience in a new country. Both my children were born in Belgium, and the way that they do things there are different from how they do things here. Um, it was really interesting to kind of experience that too. And then it was in the same hospital that I lost Zeynah in, and so then having to go back to the same place. And then also the way that people speak to you. And so I was there for this pregnancy loss, and I'm talking to a doctor who's only interested in like the pregnancy and birth. And so when I'm like, I've had two pregnancies, were they successful pregnancies? Yes, I had two children. What did you have? I had two girls and had two girls, 2013, 2016. And so then the statement of, oh, so you have two gorgeous girls at home, and it's like, actually, no, I don't. And so that experience was really hard too, because no one wrote it down in my file, and every new person that I had to speak to, it was this whole story of like, oh, so you have two kids at home? No, I have one kid at home. And so like that was really hard, because again, you get thrown into these communities that you never would have had the privilege or honor of being amongst if you weren't there too. Um, you know, doctors and nurses and hospital staff often don't think about what's happening in this person's life and how the language that they should use with people. And since then, I've met women who've had stillbirths and have had to go in for like their 6 months check, and doctors have said, "How's your baby at home?" And it's like, there is no baby. And so this like language is so important, and how we talk to people is so important. And it's been wild kind of looking at the statistics of infant loss, and it's like 1 in 5 losses end in miscarriage. And I wasn't aware of that, because my two pregnancies ended in birth and life. 6 out of 1,000 births are stillborn, and that's wild to me as well, because it's a number that I didn't know. And so now I've kind of got this community of like child loss, but I also now have a community of like pregnancy and infant loss, and it's some of them go hand in hand. Like there's people who've lost both, and some of them are very separate. And there's some people who can't understand like that I've lost a 9 and 3/4 year old, because they haven't had a child. Like their losses ended in like pregnancy and miscarriage, stillbirth. And so those kind of look differently. Like I had 9.5 years with my girl, and we had pictures and memories, and she made me cards, and like I have her wardrobe and her shoes and her notebooks and her journals, and like they're two very different, but they're also the same. Um, and so it's also just off the back of anaphylaxis and awareness week, so like this podcast is really like timely. um I Yeah, that was a really hard loss because it just felt like a really hard kick to the gut. um I also found it really hard because I didn't tell Ziva that we were pregnant, and I also didn't tell her about the loss because it's loss upon loss and layers of grief, and she's already having a hard time. And so that's been hard because you're carrying like two sets of grief within you. Um, but again, faith comes in to everything that I do. And shortly after that loss, I was reading something in an Islamic book, and it said that even unborn children will drag their parents to heaven by the umbilical cord. And it's just so like, it just, that promise of being reunited, right? I don't know if it's going to happen. No one goes and comes back to tell you whether it's true or not, but if it's something that's going to help me get through my life, whether it's another 30 years, 40 years, whether I live to 100, like if that helps me get through those days, then I'm all good with that. And I feel sad for those who don't have that, because it must be a really hard and dark place. Um, and then I come back to that piece of maybe that's where you have to regulate your nervous system and be okay on the days that are really hard, and find ways to bring joy even on those days that are really hard. I don't know. It's new to me, and there's no manual, so I'm just figuring it out as we go along. Um, and I don't know whether there'll be another little soul who comes, um, or whether it comes through me, or I don't know, in another way. But I do in my bones feel like Ziva isn't meant to be alone.
Wow, Maryam, you've done a lot of work.
Trying. Some
Oh my
days are
goodness.
really hard. Some days are really, really hard. I think I made a promise to myself that I would always wake up and get dressed. And I think, and I've kept that promise. There hasn't been a single day that I haven't woken up and not gotten dressed, because I think that spirals into like self pity, depression, and rightly so. Not, there's no judgment. It spirals into like a deeper hole, and then you can't kind of get yourself out. And so I made a promise to myself that every day I would get dressed, and every day I would find a way to laugh about something. And I use humor a lot, and sometimes inappropriate humor. But I want to laugh, and laughing changes like your hormones and the way that you perceive things. And so I try to do that, wake up and get dressed and laugh. And those are the two things that are like constant, and everything else kind of comes and goes. Like some days there is no breath work or intentional breath. Um, Other days there's no cold plunging, no grounding, no meditation, no journaling. Um, but those two things are always constant, and praying whenever I can. Yeah.
Your children are so lucky to have had you as their mother, truly. And you have such mother energy. Like it's, you really
No,
do. You really
I
do.
know. Oh, I don't know. It was really, I don't, and I never saw myself as a mother. I never ever was that person who was like, I'm gonna have kids and it's gonna be this. And if you ask my mum, I'm the least motherly person in my family. But I think for me, like my children came as teachers to me, and I think one of them taught me how to love the crap out of life, no matter how bad it got. And Zeynah had a lot of health issues, in and out of hospital. She would have reactions that would make her eyes so swollen, but she would look in the mirror and laugh and say, Mama, look, I look like a monster. And she would find a way to laugh and live fully. And so I have a teacher who came to teach me that. And my other child is this like big energy, like doesn't care about what people think, lives to their own beat of their own drum, but really just, and really has a really like strong moral compass. So I'm learning a lot from her too. Um, So I think we were meant for each other. And I don't know if I was motherly to them, but I wanted to show them that they could be brave and strong, and that they didn't have to wear dresses to be beautiful, and that they could advocate for themselves and for others. And I think if I've done that, then my job is done. I don't know.
I think we should have you back for part two. Um,
Come back.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing the life of such a beautiful, beautiful girl. I love seeing your posts of these like very synchronicity moments, these little signs that come to you. It's yeah, you are tapped in. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that this is gonna bring to those who haven't lost a child, I think this is gonna bring some understanding, maybe some better language, even just the knowledge of just check in. If they don't respond, you've still done your job as someone who loves them. And I'm
Yeah.
gonna put some of the resources that you mentioned in the notes
Yeah. Yeah.
because community, right? Isolation can devour us. And we don't want Hank to
We
to
don't want Hank to get angry.
yeah, yeah.
Take over.
Yeah. So thank you, Maryam. And
Thank you so
I
much,
look forward
Jannah.
to all of our future chats.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining me on today's episode. My hope is that something today gets carried out into the conversations of your life. I'm so grateful to share this experience with you and to know that there are others out there who want to get more comfortable, competent, and confident talking about death. If you have a topic or guest you think would be great for the show, reach out and let me know.